Being alone is not weakness, it is not loneliness, it is power. When you choose to stand by yourself, you remove distractions, you remove noise, and you start to hear your own voice. You stop relying on someone else to validate your worth. You stop waiting for permission to live your life. When you understand that solitude sharpens you, strengthens you, and centers you, that's when you realize being alone is not something to fear, it's something to master. When you allow yourself to step away from the noise of the world, you start to see who you really are without filters, without influence, and without the weight of other people's expectations pressing down on you. Most people avoid being alone because they're afraid of what they'll find when the distractions are stripped away. They are afraid of silence because silence forces them to confront truth, and truth isn't always comfortable. But solitude has this unique ability to hold up a mirror to show you the raw version of yourself, the version that isn't trying to impress, isn't trying to fit in, isn't trying to chase approval. It's just you as you are, with no performance attached. That kind of clarity is a gift, but it requires courage to sit in it. When you spend time alone, you start noticing patterns in your thoughts, your emotions, your behaviors. You begin to question why you do what you do. You start recognizing whether the life you're living is actually yours or just a version crafted by someone else's standards. That's where self-awareness begins, when you stop running from yourself and instead start listening. Every decision you've ever made, every mistake, every success, it all starts to make sense because you're looking at it without judgment, without outside noise clouding your perspective. You start to see not just who you are, but also who you're not. And both matter equally, because knowing what you are not is just as powerful as knowing what you are. Solitude is not isolation. It's an intentional choice to remove yourself from the influence of the crowd so you can figure out your own direction. The world is loud, constantly telling you what success should look like, what happiness should feel like, what your life should be. And if you're not careful, you end up chasing someone else's version of fulfillment while completely losing sight of your own. Being alone cuts through that noise. It's in that quiet space that you ask yourself the hard questions. What do I actually want? What am I doing because I love it versus what am I doing because I feel pressured to? Where am I compromising just to belong? Those answers are not easy, but they are the foundation of true self-awareness. People confuse being surrounded with being fulfilled. They think that having constant company means they're happy or successful. But some of the loneliest people are the ones in crowded rooms, surrounded by others yet completely disconnected from themselves. On the other hand, some of the strongest, most grounded people you'll ever meet are those who have mastered the art of being alone. They know themselves inside out. They're not swayed by trends, opinions, or external validation because they've built their identity from within, not from outside applause. That's the strength solitude gives you. It centers you so deeply that no one else's opinion can knock you off course. When you step into solitude, you stop outsourcing your worth. You stop measuring yourself against who's clapping for you, who's liking your posts, who's inviting you into their circle. Instead, you create your own circle. You build your own approval, and that's the kind of self-awareness that changes everything, because once you know yourself that deeply, you stop negotiating your values, your goals, your boundaries. You stop apologizing for being you. You stop settling for less than what aligns with your truth. Solitude is uncomfortable at first, but it's in that discomfort that growth happens. You learn to sit with your emotions instead of burying them. You learn to manage your fears instead of running from them. You learn to trust your own judgment instead of leaning on someone else to decide for you. That kind of self-awareness doesn't just change how you see yourself, it changes how you move in the world. It gives you the clarity to choose people, opportunities, and paths that actually serve you, not just distract you. And the more time you give yourself in solitude, the sharper that awareness becomes until you reach a place where being alone doesn't feel like a void, it feels like power. When you learn to spend time alone, you sharpen one of the most powerful tools you will ever have, your ability to make decisions. Most people make choices based on noise, what their family thinks, what society pushes, what their friends are doing. Rarely do they pause long enough to ask themselves, what do I want? Alone time removes that constant interference. It gives you the space to think clearly without being pressured, without being swayed, without the weight of someone else's opinion tipping the scale. In solitude, you begin to see that every decision carries energy, and when you're surrounded by too many voices, you give away your control over where that energy flows. But when you're alone, you learn how to trust your own voice. That trust turns into confidence, and that confidence turns into stronger, faster, more intentional decision making. When you take others out of the equation, you realize how much of your past has been shaped by fear of judgment or desire for approval. Maybe you stayed in a job too long because you didn't want to disappoint your family. Maybe you settled in a relationship because society told you being with anyone, was better than being alone. Maybe you chose safety over passion because the world told you risk was irresponsible. Alone time forces you to confront those patterns, to see where you've let outside influence hijack your choices. And when you finally face that, something shifts inside you. You start reclaiming your decision, making power because you recognize that the only person who has to live with your choices is you. Being alone allows you to weigh your options without pressure. It's not about being reckless or careless. It's about being intentional. In silence, you hear the logic and the intuition that often get drowned out in chaos. You begin to notice which decisions feel aligned and which ones don't. You catch yourself before you commit to things that drain you. You notice the difference between what looks good to the world and what actually feels good for your soul. That ability to pause, reflect, and decide from a place of alignment makes you stronger than people who need a committee to validate every move. You don't waste time guessing because you've built that inner compass and you trust it. The truth is, indecision destroys more dreams than failure ever could. People hesitate, delay, overthink, and end up doing nothing because they're terrified of making the wrong move. Solitude helps you break that cycle. It teaches you to make a choice and own it. Even if it's not perfect, even if it leads to a mistake, you learn from it and move forward. That resilience builds over time, and soon you stop being paralyzed by fear. You realize that the only real mistake is giving away your power to decide. The act of choosing itself becomes a form of strength, and that strength multiplies with every decision you take into your own hands. When you practice making decisions alone, you also strengthen your boundaries. You learn to say no without guilt because you're no longer basing your choices on keeping everyone else comfortable. You learn to say yes to things that stretch you, even if others don't understand. You stop asking for permission and start giving yourself permission, and that shift is life-changing, because once you can trust yourself to decide, you stop chasing certainty from others. You stop letting fear of rejection or criticism dictate your path. You begin to stand firm in your truth, and that makes every decision, not just easier but bolder. Strong decision-making is not about always being right. It's about being unafraid to choose to learn and to adjust. Solitude gives you the clarity and the courage to do exactly that. And when you stand on your own 2 feet and realize you can navigate life without leaning on someone else to validate your choices, something inside of you changes forever. Independence doesn't come from saying the words. It comes from the lived experience of proving to yourself that you can survive, adapt, and thrive without someone holding your hand every step of the way. That's when confidence stops being fragile and starts becoming unshakable. Because confidence that depends on outside approval can be taken away the moment that approval disappears. But confidence that comes from independence is yours, and no one can touch it. Think about how most people operate. They tie their sense of worth to whether or not someone compliments them, accepts them, or validates their decisions, and when that external validation is missing, they crumble. They guess themselves, they hold back, they stop taking risks. But the person who has learned to stand alone doesn't need the applause, doesn't need the reassurance, doesn't need the constant reminder of you're doing okay. Because they've already tested themselves in the silence of independence, they know what they are capable of, not because someone else told them, but because they lived it and proved it to themselves. Independence forces you to face challenges head on. When there's no safety net of constant support, you either figure things out or you don't. And in figuring them out, you discover that you are far stronger and far more capable than you ever gave yourself credit for. That's where real confidence is born, from the evidence of your own resilience. It's not theory, it's not wishful thinking, it's lived proof that you can fall, get back up, and keep moving forward. Every time you solve a problem on your own, every time you make a hard decision without waiting for approval, every time you refuse to compromise your values just to belong, you are stacking bricks of confidence so solid that no one can tear them down. When you are independent, you stop needing permission. You stop waiting for someone to tell you it's okay to take a risk, to chase a dream, to walk away from what doesn't serve you. That kind of self-authorization is what makes people unshakable. Because if your entire identity and strength depend on someone else's approval, you're one rejection away from collapse. But when your confidence is built on independence, rejection doesn't scare you. Criticism doesn't derail you. Loss doesn't destroy you. You may bend, but you don't break, because your foundation was never built on someone else. It was built on you. Unshakable confidence also shifts the way you show up in relationships, in work, in every part of your life. When you don't need someone else to make you feel secure, you show up stronger, clearer, more grounded. You're not chasing people, not begging for attention, not bending yourself out of shape just to be liked. Instead, you bring your full, authentic self into every room, and ironically, that's what makes people respect you even more. People can sense when someone stands firmly in their independence, when they radiate the kind of confidence that doesn't waver with the tides of opinion. That presence is magnetic because it's rare. Independence doesn't mean you don't need anyone. It means you don't rely on anyone to define your worth. It means you can share your life with people from a place of strength, not desperation. And that is where unshakable confidence thrives, not in needing others, but in choosing them from a place of wholeness. When you reach that point, life changes. Challenges no longer intimidate you, losses no longer define you, and setbacks no longer shatter you. You've built something so solid inside yourself that no matter what the world throws your way, you remain steady. That's the gift of independence, and that's the root of true, unshakable confidence. Boundaries are not about pushing people away, they are about protecting the space you need in order to live authentically. Most people struggle with boundaries because they are terrified of being seen as selfish, rude, or unloving. But the truth is, boundaries are the ultimate act of self-respect. They are the lines you draw that say, "This is where I end and you begin." Without them, you are constantly open to being pulled, drained, manipulated, and stretched in directions that don't serve you. When you learn to stand alone, you begin to realize how essential those lines are. Because when you're by yourself, you can feel the difference between peace and chaos. You know what it's like to feel whole, and the moment someone disturbs that balance, you recognize it immediately. Standing alone teaches you that your time, your energy, and your peace are valuable. You begin to see that you can't pour into everyone without emptying yourself, and you can't always say yes without losing yourself in the process. Boundaries become easier to protect when you've experienced the strength that solitude gives you, because now you're not afraid of walking away, you're not afraid of silence, you're not afraid of being without the people who refuse to respect your limits. You know you'll be fine because you've already built a foundation of independence and self-reliance. That changes everything about the way you interact with others. People without boundaries often feel exhausted, resentful, and taken for granted. They say yes when they want to say no, they stay longer than they should, they give more than they can afford, and then they wonder why they feel unseen, unheard, and unappreciated. But when you create clear boundaries, you send a message to yourself and to others that your life has value, that your time isn't cheap, that your energy isn't unlimited, that your presence isn't something people can just take without giving back, and that message changes the way people treat you. Those who respect you will honor your boundaries, and those who don't will eventually fall away. Both outcomes are gifts because either you deepen the relationships that matter or you shed the ones that don't. The strength to hold your boundaries comes from being comfortable with solitude. When you know you can stand alone, you don't compromise yourself just to avoid being abandoned. You don't allow guilt to drive you into situations you don't want. You don't sacrifice your well-being just to maintain an image of being nice or easygoing. Instead, you stand firm because you know your worth isn't dependent on how much you tolerate. That's why solitude is powerful. It removes the fear of being left alone, and once that fear is gone, you can finally enforce the boundaries you need. Boundaries are also a filter. They reveal who is in your life for the right reasons and who is there just to take. When you start saying no, when you stop overextending yourself, when you make it clear what you will and will not accept, you start to see people's true colors. Some will respect you more, others will disappear. And both are outcomes you should welcome, because every time you protect your boundaries, you are aligning your life with people, experiences, and environments that respect and uplift you instead of drain and diminish you. Protecting boundaries is not about control, it's about clarity. It's about knowing yourself so well that you no longer feel guilty for protecting what makes you strong, happy, and whole, and the more you practice it, the more natural it becomes. You stop second-guessing yourself, you stop apologizing, and you stop feeling like you owe pieces of yourself to anyone who demands them. That's the kind of freedom that comes from standing alone first, because once you've proven you can survive without constant approval, you'll never again trade your peace for temporary acceptance. True power doesn't come from who you know, what you own, or how many people surround you. It comes from the ability to rely on yourself no matter what. When you can meet your own needs, regulate your own emotions, make your own decisions, and create your own stability, you become untouchable. Self-reliance is the foundation of real power because it means you're not at the mercy of anyone else's choices, moods, or approval. You can stand strong whether people show up for you or not, whether circumstances go your way or not. That is the kind of strength that can't be shaken because it comes from within. Most people spend their lives outsourcing their power. They lean on partners, friends, family, or even society to dictate who they are and what they're capable of. And as long as your sense of security depends on someone else, you are vulnerable. The moment they withdraw, you collapse. But when you cultivate self-reliance, you no longer hand over that control. You no longer let your identity hinge on whether someone chooses you, supports you, or validates you. Instead, you hold that power in your own hands, and once you taste that freedom, you'll never want to go back to living without it. Self-reliance doesn't mean you isolate yourself or refuse connection. It means that connection becomes a choice, not a lifeline. You choose people from strength, not desperation. You enter relationships because you want to, not because you need to. That's the difference between dependence and independence. When you're dependent, you bend, shrink, and compromise just to keep people around. But when you're self-reliant, you don't fear losing anyone because you know you won't lose yourself. That's what makes you powerful. When nothing and no one has the ability to take away your stability, power also comes from the discipline of showing up for yourself day after day. When you take responsibility for your own growth, your own healing, your own success, you stop waiting for rescue. You stop hoping someone else will fix it, save you, or make things easier. You become your own safety net, your own motivator, your own guide, and that builds a deep trust in yourself. You learn that no matter how hard life gets, you can handle it. You can figure it out, you can adapt, adjust, and rebuild. That trust is unshakable because it's not theory, it's proof built from every challenge you've survived on your own. True self-reliance also strips away fear. Fear of being abandoned, fear of being rejected, fear of starting over. All of it loses power when you know you can depend on yourself. Because what can anyone really take from you if you already know you'll be fine on your own? That's why people who are self-reliant walk differently. They carry themselves with quiet confidence, not because they have it all, but because they know even if they lose it all, they'll rise again. That's real power. It's not in never falling, it's in knowing you can always get back up. This kind of strength also changes how the world sees you. People respect those who are self-reliant because they can sense it. They can feel the difference between someone who clings out of need and someone who stands tall out of choice. And it's not arrogance, it's presence. It's the unspoken energy that says, I am whole with or without you. That energy commands respect because it's rare, and it makes others realize they cannot manipulate, control, or diminish you. The greatest freedom you'll ever experience is realizing you are enough on your own. When you no longer fear solitude, when you no longer outsource your worth, when you no longer rely on anyone else to define you, you finally tap into true power. Self-reliance doesn't just prepare you for the storms of life, it makes you the storm.